Welcome to another empowering session with the Divorce Allies. I'm here with the incredible Melissa Gregg, and today we're tackling a big fear for many going through divorce: depositions. Specifically, how to handle those loaded or judgmental questions. Maybe you've made mistakes or your ex is trying to paint you in a bad light. But what if you could own your truth and still come out composed, clear, and in control? Melissa's going to show us how. Thank you, Melissa. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, we had a great session yesterday all about depositions in our membership community, but I think that it almost got people more anxious or more a little like when we did the role play, it really got people in that space. And I think that this is going to be good to give some clarity, some kind of preparation, or to have a plan going into depositions.
I do too. And we're going to follow this up with another workshop that is more like prep for depositions too. So stay tuned for that. But okay, so let's kind of tackle some stuff. Melissa, when someone's worried about being asked about drinking or overspending or parental fighting in front of the kids, or where should they start mentally and strategically when preparing for depositions?
Well, when you're preparing for depositions, the reality is you're going into a situation and you're going to be asked questions by the other side's attorney, so your spouse's attorney. And that means that you're not going to know what questions are being asked. And you're going to sit there, and it could be 1 hour, it could be 5 hours, it could be, multiple days. It really depends on the complexity of your case and maybe the complications. And so I think whenever you first get started in prepping for deposition, you have to sort of get mentally prepared for what the expectation is of the questions. So a lot of times an attorney may prep you for some of the questions that you could expect, but quite frankly, attorneys don't know what is involved in a deposition because they don't typically sit on the other side where you're going to sit. They are asking the questions, they're in control, and that's a great place to be. But when you're in the deposition and you're being deposed, there's going to be questions that are going to be asked that you didn't expect and you don't really know if there's a great answer to, right? And so a lot of times at the beginning, you should identify maybe the 3 or 5 areas that are most volatile in your situation. And so that means, like, if there was infidelity, if there was cheating, if there was money missing, if there are bad deeds, if maybe both of you or one of you has addiction issues or gambling issues and things like that. If there were some complications to your marriage, that's where they're going to go towards those questions first.
So that definitely leads us to our next question, right? So if I've made a mistake, like yelling during an argument or having a drink too many one night, driving after having one drink, how can I answer that question honestly without damaging my credibility or custody chances?
Well, and a lot of times custody and money are the biggest issues. So they're going to try to ask questions that are going to make you seem like a bad person, a bad mother, a bad parent, a bad wife, a bad spouse, all of these things. What they're doing is trying to crack your credibility, but they're also paying attention to how you respond. And so if you start to be argumentative, or if you start to kind of evade the questions, or have really short, snappy answers, they're looking to that because they know that you might do that on the stand at trial. So deposition is your first time to testify, and you really have to be consistent and tell the truth in this process. So if you made mistakes in life that are going to be kind of brought to the forefront, you have to admit to them and maybe spin them. So it's kind of a little bit like sales. It's like, or an interview when people ask you, like, what's your worst trait? Like those types of things, you're really presenting your worst trait, but you're also kind of spinning it. And you don't want to just spin it to push it back on the other side. Like, is it true that there was infidelity in the marriage on both parts, or on your part? And you could describe that, but you could also very clearly describe that there was infidelity on his part. So it's more so getting into the mindset of being really calm, clear, listening to the questions, answering the questions, and being truthful. So if those situations happened, you either need to stop having them happen, or, like I only have one drink if I'm going to drive with the kids, or I only, hit them one time, or we only had like you can't just evade it, and you can't be snarky in the response to it. And you have to understand that all of those mistakes are typically going to be what your spouse has told the attorney to ask you about. Just like you're going to tell your attorney you want some tough answers, tough questions asked in the deposition of your spouse, they're going to ask that too. And maybe sometimes if they don't know the information, like if they knew there was infidelity, but they want to know more, the questions could be about your love life. They could be about your relationship. They could be about the things that you did behind closed doors. And so all of that is going to come to light. That's typically why a deposition is a tool to rattle the other side. And so the more you're prepared for it, the more you don't fall into some of these traps.
Man, yep. So I get that. So how do you help clients reframe questions designed to make them look bad? Can you give us an example of like turning a character accusation into a strength? I mean, yesterday we kind of talked a little bit about like, yes, I had an affair, but that was after, he had 15 affairs, but it was in a calmer way instead of an accusatory way.
Yeah, practice, practice, practice. And so this means not practicing 2 days before the deposition. This means practicing a week before the deposition or 2 weeks before the deposition. It means writing out those questions and what your answers are, and really honing them in. And even like asking ChatGPT to what are questions that could be asked of me in a deposition, and starting to enunciate those questions. And so that could look like hours of preparation if you're literally sitting here and answering these questions, and then I dictate the answers so that I can look at them again and kind of be like, okay, how do I massage this, or how do I make this a little bit better? Because you want to almost be prepared for those responses. If you know you cheated, or he cheated, or both of you did, or you have addiction issues, you want to deal with those head on and really come out there and say something about it in a very clear manner. So the question could be like, isn't it true that you cheated on your spouse, several times? The answer would be, that is correct. I did cheat, with 2 different people over the course of, several episodes, but this was also as a response to him having several affairs prior to that. So again, that's a calculated response that, as long as I've prepared it in advance, then I'm ready to have just a very baseline response, no emotion, because they're going to try to go deeper into those questions of like, the affair, intimate details and things like that. So they're working to try to trigger you. I mean, they're trying to see how much is it going to take to trigger you, and how quickly can they do it, because they're going to do it very quickly in trial. And they're looking to see if you're going to be a good representative of yourself in trial, because if you're not, that's leverage to them, right? They know that they can maybe convince you to settle something, but flipping the script is being prepared, knowing the questions, practicing your response, and having it be very succinct and precise and less emotion.
Which kind of leads us into our next question. It's along the same lines, but I think we can go into it just a little bit more. So, what are some techniques to stay emotionally steady if you're caught off guard, or you feel like you're about to cry or shut down? Because even if we've practiced, sometimes there are triggers in there, or there, the spouse is huffing and puffing, and we're, we can get kind of worked up or reactive.
Yeah. This might be the first time that you've actually been in person with your spouse in a long time. This might make you uncomfortable because they're going to be seated across from you is going to be the attorney asking the questions, and next to them could be your spouse. So at all times you're talking to the attorney, but out of the corner of your eye, you can see your spouse. And so you have to, like in the Divorce Allies, we are constantly talking every single week about financial understanding and mindset control. And so a lot of this is mindset, it's preparation, it's making sure that you are not overwhelmed when you go into this process or you're already on edge. So if you, though, freeze or get emotional because they really find a trigger, and they might be going for 2 hours before they find something that triggers you, and you're already kind of exhausted from the process. So you have to look at this as a game or a performance, and you take a break. Okay. And so at the point that you get emotional or you freeze or you even just, I actually encourage people to take a break every hour, because that then prevents you from getting into that overwhelm. You go to the bathroom, you take 10 minutes, you get a snack, you get a drink, you get a coffee, you reset mentally, and then you go back in. And I think that is taking the break on the regular basis, having a glass of water that you're taking a sip from, every other question, so that you are kind of have a methodic way of operating is going to be helpful. But at all times, if things really go sideways, you ask for a break. And a lot of times in these situations, there will be a lunch break. So that's going to give you a break. But every hour, it's totally normal to take a bio break and to kind of release some of that energy. Walk outside and maybe get some fresh air and just shift the energy so that you can be prepared. This is a marathon. This is something that you have to be mentally and physically strong enough to do. And if you think it's just about the questions, it's not. It's about everything that you exude when you're there is going to be a tell. So if you're sitting there like fidgeting with your fingers all the time, like what does that look like, right? If I'm like, like keep your hands on your lap, keep them underneath. You can do some of that fidgeting. Can you see me fidgeting right now? No, you cannot. So, be mindful of what your anxiety or your kind of nervousness is, and then be mindful that every word that you communicate is going to be taken down. So if you need a break, ask for a break and then leave the room. Or if you need a break, just be quiet and think about the question and then respond in your own time.
I would even go as far as, if I was taking a break and I walked outside, I would take off my shoes and kind of ground myself in the grass. If I could find some, I would do, I would really kind of just, and maybe do one of Kristen's meditations, or,
absolutely,
have an app or something.
This is not rocket science. Like
Yeah.
this is physiologically, this is a very stressful event.
Yeah.
Like I have prepped lawyers to go and do depositions, and they are just as nervous as everybody else. So the reality is, the more you practice and you have like this canned response for these really triggering questions, and then you stick to the truth. You calmly answer it, you listen exactly what they're asking, and you just answer what they're asking. You're not there to educate them on all of this information. They're on a fact-finding mission. They're trying to find facts that they did not have an idea of, so they're going to ask you open-ended sentences.
Absolutely, which is what you just answered. It's the goal of an attorney. They're trying to rattle you. They're trying to pull unnecessary details and information out of you, and then twist it to make it look bad. You said at one point that they even start out super friendly and kind of get you rolling and comfortable, and then all of a sudden it's like they
This
turn.
is not like the movies. This is a fact-finding mission. This is the attorney's opportunity to ask you all the questions, big open-ended questions, hoping that you talk and talk and talk and give them information. They're never going to ask a question at trial that they did not ask in the deposition, because they want to know what the answer is, and then they'll ask you yes and no questions at trial. But the attorney is trying to see how much they need to do to trigger you. So at the beginning, and even for the most part during the entire deposition, they are going to seem like your best friend. What do we do with our best friend? We share information. And so they're probably never going to really try to trigger you. The questions are going to trigger you. So they're going to be sweet as punch, asking you, well, what did you do in the bedroom with that person? Why are you swinging? Well, what about that alcoholic, episode? Like they're going to say it sweet as pie, like your granny would tell you, and ask you questions. So you have to guard yourself so that at all times you are just listening to the question and answering in a very methodical way. Now, if they don't see you triggered as them being nice, that's where they're going to go in a little bit deeper. But typically what they're doing is asking you the same question multiple different times, hoping that you will trigger and mess up and say something inconsistent. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's why continuing to be about the truth and not trying to make up some sort of fallacy is going to be best. You can remember the truth. If it's a bad truth that doesn't make you look good, you spin it a little bit, and we can talk more about that. But I mean, in general, it makes you have to think about this. Like I was like being emotionally betrayed or things like this, and what your reasonings are for doing some of that stuff is maybe not as necessary for you to talk about. It's more so the factual information about it, and or what do you want them to know that would dispel the fact that that was so bad, because their client is telling them how bad it is. So you want to introduce facts to the situation as opposed to malign the other person and be like, oh, well, they told you that version of the story. Well, actually, maybe here's some things that you didn't know, right? You want to make them move off of a topic if they really got it wrong.
Absolutely. So, and I think I have one, but any final tips on body language, breathing, mindset that might help someone reclaim their power even while being questioned aggressively?
So one of the things that I try to do is not have tells. So not have any indication of when I don't know the answer to a question or I need time to think. And so that starts at the very beginning, as when they're asking you questions, you're really pausing and counting to 3 or 5 before you answer the question. Now, maybe not for the like, what's your name, what's your address, and things like that. But once you get past some of those initial questions, when somebody asks you a question, just kind of be like, that's 3 seconds. Okay. Allow it to formulate what your answer is. Allow yourself to give time to what did they actually ask, not what you thought they asked. This is active listening. Okay. What they actually asked. And if you got caught up in your head and you weren't listening to the question, do not try to assume what they asked. Ask them to clarify. Could they reframe that question? Could you ask that question in another way? I did not understand. I'm sorry, I did not hear you properly. I was distracted looking at something. Like ask them to ask it again until you fully understand the question, because sometimes it could be a compound question. Take 3 seconds, then respond. On other times, you would take a sip of water, which would be part of your 3 to 5 seconds, and then respond. And each time you may know the answer immediately, but when you don't and you need some of that time, it allows you to still have that pace of answering. And so they can't really know that that question triggered you or kind of caught you off guard, right? Just kind of continue in the process.
That was genius. And I think for me, it would be recording myself to prep. It would be recording myself explaining these answers kind of over and over again and starting to refine, and even my hand gestures and my pauses and all of those things, I think would be a really great way to prepare and to hone in your responses, your emotions, your triggers, your tells, your all those things.
Well,
I
and
think
you
that'd
and
be
you
great.
have I think that's a brilliant idea. I think that doing that with somebody
Mm-hmm.
so that they're asking the questions and you're going through that cadence, and it could be an hour or two, and you record it kind of like in a setting like this, and then
Mm-hmm.
you go back and see what you would do different. Now, I do encourage people to prep with an expert, not an attorney. The attorney, and realistically, most attorneys are going to prep you for like an hour or something and just say, here are some of the questions based on your situation that I think that you're going to encounter. An expert is going to prep you on your performance, your presentation of the information, so that they see you as a threat, right? And so we want them to say, oh, we don't want to take her to trial. She's going to look amazingly sympathetic. Like the judge is going to like how she speaks. She's not flustered. She's not unhinged like he's saying, which quite frankly, it could be that you have healed some, or you focus on the healing so that when you're ready for that step, you are really prepared to step into the power of it. And if your attorney already knows some of those questions, just get those in advance, get those in a couple weeks in advance, and then sit down with the expert and go through what your methodical answers are, because experts are in the hot seat all the time. Like, that's my job. Part of my job is to be in depositions. I had one last week. I had a trial last week. That's normal. For attorneys, they don't have to be in depositions. They're asking it. So you want both perspectives, the
Mm-hmm.
person who's going to ask the questions, but also the person who has sat in the hot seat. That's going to give you a more rounded preparation process.
Right. So my goodness, that what a great, uh, you just knocked it out of the park for me. I feel even so much better. Like, okay, I may even be able to give a deposition
Yeah,
at some
because
point.
it was nerve-wracking. Like, you felt a lot of
I
anxiety
did.
whenever you were watching like the role playing,
I
right?
did. I did. I was completely just taken aback and did not know what to do with myself. And that is the reason why, I decided to ask you about this. So here are some of my takeaways from today. Reframe, don't react. Negative questions can be flipped into growth stories or demonstrate maturity. Honesty, is going to combat self sabotage. So admit past mistakes with context and proof of change. Stay regulated. Breath work, posture, and preparation are your armor. It's not personal, it's strategy. Opposing counsel wants a reaction. Give them calm clarity instead. And there's power in presence. Your tone, your demeanor, and your eye contact are all evidence of your credibility. So that was so powerful. If you're heading into a deposition or supporting a friend who is, this workshop is one to rewatch and take notes on for sure. Why we don't shy away from the tough stuff here. We really tackle it because the way you show up matters. Join our ally circle for more real conversations, local meetups, private support as you rebuild. Melissa, thank you again.
Thank you.